What's poppin', everyone? Welcome back to Real Reds Talk. It's that time of the month where we have a very special guest on who we love talking to. Very insightful. I know a lot of our community excited for tonight's show from the comments in the afternoon show. So first and foremost, James, how are we doing? And are you excited, hence, kind of looking forward to the summer?
Yes, I'm doing well. Thank you. It's always good to come back. And I would say I'm excited for the summer. Usually I'm excited for it, and then as it gets closer, I start to dread it because I know exactly how it goes.
Mm.
But I think we'll have a chance for things to be a bit different, and obviously we'll get into a whole lot of things that have happened and why it'll be a bit different. But you know, quicker, different. The people who are leaving, the people who are being removed, all the stuff that's happened. Big reasons why things have been so frustrating, so slow all the time, so drawn out. And I think that's the part of the summer that people hate, is when you get excited for what's going to happen, and by the time it does, you're practically sick of it.
Mm.
And hopefully that isn't how it is anymore.
Sam, just before you kick things off, because
Sure.
I know you're desperate to talk about Ineos, if we do have anyone in the comment section, you have any questions for James, do leave them in the chat. If we don't cover them during the show, then we'll get to them towards the end of the show. But Sam, yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I think the word James was looking for in the summer is competency, because it's been severely lacking in the last couple of years. But on that, last couple of days, James, we've seen the hierarchy dramatically change. We saw Professor X leave, didn't we? Patrick Stewart. Is he CFO? CEO? I can't remember what his title was. And then who was the CFO? The other guy? I can't remember his name. Yes, that's the guy. So they've left. Omar Brad is due to start July the 16th, I believe. Ashworth's imminent, according to Sir Jim Radcliffe. World Cup's already in place. Do you think we see further sort of takeover in different areas from Ineos? Do you think this is just a start? And also the second question is, was this always the plan to have this dramatic changeover of everything? And do you think they've had to change plans now because they've realised how big this job is on their hands, and they think oh, actually we need more control, we need more people, we need different things to come in?
I think that what you're seeing is what was always going to happen and what was always intended. I think if you go back to when we talked about all this before they got in, I made the point pretty clearly that as far as I could understand it, and in breaking down the deal, even when it was agreed, the remit that Ineos were going to have and the intention behind all of this was a lot bigger than 25% and football control, right? We spoke about it all, and I thought it was clear as day that there was a lot of language in the deal that was made and in everything set up that really opens the door for a full takeover in the future. And they would have sold. That's the thing that people, I think, kind of didn't grasp at times when they considered this as minimized it. This deal would have been totally different. It would have been more like a 70% takeover if it were not for some of the legal challenges that had come up during it, and they had not just decided, let's just get something done so we can get in control. From the Glazer perspective, it's a win-win. Unfortunately, in this case, it's a win-win for everybody. Not that people like seeing the Glazers win, but factually it is a win-win for everybody, this whole process. Ineos get to come in, do everything. It's only going to make the club more valuable for the Glazers later on, and likely in selling to Jim Ratcliffe, who's the person who's driven that growth and that improvement. And he gets in control. He's got more than a foot in the door. He's got, it's his club. Look at it.
Yeah.
The CEO is his CEO of Ineos Sport right now. The one coming in on July 13 is the one he hired. CFO is the retired CFO of Ineos Sport right now. Director of football is someone they're bringing in. Technical director is someone they're bringing in. You could probably bet that more people will be replaced. Maybe not quite as high profile in terms of the names, but there will be more replacements. It's always been the plan from day one all the way back there to focus on a top-down replacement of basically everybody. and the entire structure of things, because it's hard to build over bad foundations. You can knock the house down, but what's underneath the floorboards is just as important as all the dressings, and that's what they've looked at. And rip it all up, re-pour the concrete, and build something anew. That's what's going to have to happen.
Absolutely. And for kind of donkeys like me, I know the basic terms of what each kind of person individual is going to be doing, but when we focus on the individuals, Omar Barada, Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox, and let's say, I don't know, Dougie Freeman comes in, or whoever else it is, what are their specific roles? What will they be doing on a day-to-day basis for anyone who doesn't quite understand what they're going to be doing?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, think of the CEO as a football business person, a little less than you think of him like an on-the-pitch person, because I think people get the impression if Blanc comes in means we're trying to recruit Zidane or something like that. There's no connection between those types of things, much as people would like them to be. It's not what he's there for. He's there for business. The CEO's major role in any company, right? And football really is no different. The CEO's primary goal is the financial viability of the business. That is a fact. That is what CEOs do. They're appointed by the board to make sure that the business is running and is financially viable. The difference in football is, and that's why Ed Woodward was the CEO. That's why Richard Arnold was the CEO, because that's what they do. They're finance people. They're business people. The problem is, in football, you can't just be a business person. There's the business of football, which is a totally different subject than just business in general. At the same time, your goal is a little different, because you're not really there to make money. If you're there to make money, it's to reinvest into the football club. You're really there to produce results and to provide, I would say, a football CEO's job is to provide a level of income and financial revenue, not for profit, but that allows for the club to be successful on the pitch, right? That allows for enough investment into the playing team and all the things around that. That's what Blanc is there for. That's what Barada will be there for. So on a day-to-day basis, what are they doing? Obviously, again, if they're a football person, they're going to be looking at it and saying, I want on the pitch success, and evaluating that, but not doing it on the day-to-day basis. They're going to have nothing to do with, picking players, things like that. In the short term, Barada probably will, just because he has experience in terms of negotiating and doing deals and all that. But in the long term, he won't. That won't really be his remit. But for now, think of them as commercial deals, sponsorships, the stadium project. Those are the major things that they're going to be working on at all times. When you talk about the summer tours, where are we going to go? What are we doing? All of that. Falls under the CEO for sure. The director of football, as they come in, Dan Ashworth comes in. It's really going to be about shaping all of the football departments of the club, and you got to think of it almost like an organizational factor. Like, let's say the manager's job is to organize his team and put his 11 players in the right spot and what they're supposed to do. Well, a director of football is the same for all the departments of football, including the women's football, the academy, the scouting, the analytics, all of the different departments together as major players, organizing them to be aligned, to be working together in conjunction towards the overall ultimate goal. So just like you would on the pitch, getting 11 players to work together, getting all these departments really on the same page, something that has not happened. You don't want them all to be like operating on their own without, where you've seen that, right? You can see it almost now where United's academy is run really well, but that doesn't mean it results in success, because there's other broken pieces
in
terms of how it all
between the two.
Yeah, and how it all plays together, and that's where the director of football comes in. When you talk about you've got great youth talents coming through, we still don't have any success at loaning players out, developing them, bringing them back when they can't come straight into the team. Well, that's a different department. Figure those deals out, and it's been a failure, right? So a lot of different things together, and that's really the job of the director of football. So Dan Ashworth, in terms of this summer, whether he's in or he isn't, it isn't so much about we need X player in and picking them again. That's a department or a few departments that are mostly responsible for that, but it's about organizing it all properly. And then with that, moving down to technical director Jason Wilcox, he's really going to be looking at essentially almost ahead over a few departments, right? Looking at the academy transition to first team, looking at recruitment and analytics, looking at the performance on the pitch, and looking at the manager and the players. And so a huge chunk of this, right, he's going to be overseeing and really focused on. And are we playing the way that we're supposed to? Who's good enough? Who's not? Coordinating all of that between the different parties. If you need recruitment, who's the guy going between the first team and recruitment and saying, this is what we're missing, this is what we need, these are the profiles? Well, you want someone running that show, and that's going to be where he's at. Those are the major roles. And then ahead of recruitment, if we bring somebody in, would be more specifically in the recruitment, making the contacts, making the calls, doing those kind of final watches on the players. When we brought Bruno Fernandes, I think Ollie and Phelan went out themselves to watch him in January, after he'd been given a recommendation in order to make their final decision. That can happen, but that's also usually something that, like, a head of recruitment will do. Example being Dougie Freedman. That is what he does for Palace. He goes out and watches the players that they're looking to buy before they buy them as well, rather than just the scouts. So that probably gives a good kind of rundown of the overall responsibilities in there.
Yeah, before I move on to like transfers and stuff, Aaron's got a great question that I wish I would have thought of. Will Blanc have any involvement once his interim role ends as a CEO, or is he just going to be more of an advisor to Sir Jim?
I think he'll be very involved. He's on the board, either way, moving forward, and he's incredibly experienced in this. The stadium project is not a short-term thing, right? This is going to take a long time. Whichever direction they go, I do think it'll be a new stadium, but whichever direction they do end up settling on, it's a long road, a long project, and Blanc has very specific experience with that. I think he's probably the only one in that group who has specific experience doing that with Juventus, right?
Yeah.
And then he has his experience at PSG, and he's a lot of experience in football finance and organizing commercial deals. And if you want to fund the stadium without going into more debt and working at the right partnerships and things, that's the guy. And and I think in the short term, he's going to want to get a jump on lining up deals for additional revenue streams right now, and looking into that. So certainly, I think he's going to be very involved, and he's going to be someone who, as a board member, will probably have a very regular contact with Omar Barada moving forward.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Moving on to transfers. Seen a lot of reports of all players are basically up for sale. Like, whether you want to believe that or not, I don't know. But they're being made available for the right price beyond, except for Garnacho, Kobe Mainu, and Hoyland, I believe, were the three they marked out where they're just nowhere price they're not available. Is this purely, I've got two questions. Is this purely an exercise in getting money in and staying under the FFP, what is it also called? SRP or SRA?
PSR, yeah.
PSR regulations? Yes.
Yeah.
Or is this a genuine reset where they've identified these players aren't up to standard and we just need to get shut so we can restart? And the second question is, how many do you think realistically we could see leaving? And is there any shocks in there, like, for example, a Rashford or a Bruno or something like that?
Yeah. So I made a video on February 15th, 2.5 months ago, I think it was, about this specifically. And what I was given essentially at the time was that there were 3 players who I would consider safe, right, from transfer. The same 3 that have been named now. Not that that's not particularly obvious that those 3 would be the main 3. You'd be saying there's no point in selling those types of players at the moment. And it's a kind of 2-factor thing. It's not that everybody's for sale. Like, they're not actively seeking out buyers for every one of these players, right? But what they're effectively saying is, where we're moving forward, if Bruno didn't want to be here, okay. If Rashford didn't want to be here, okay. If Maguire doesn't want to be here, okay. I mean, some are more obvious than others that it's okay. But the point is that we don't need them 100%. Not that we don't want them. We don't need them as the focal points for our project moving forward. We can get by. We'll figure it out. We can replace that. We're not stuck with a specific way where like we have to build around this player or we have to build around that one, or this player's a key cog in the whole system. So it's essentially just saying that. And it's also saying, they've had discussions with the players, to be clear. And the reason this is sort of able to come out or brief or anything like that is there's probably a little bit of a different understanding the players have, which is fine, which is more in line with the truth. But the stories do, of course, help to bring in interest and buyers and things like that, is that they've made it very clear to the United players that if you don't want to be here, tell us and we'll get you the move. We want you to go. They don't want people to be stuck here on like by default. This is just go on a tangent. I know I talk endlessly on certain things to keep going, but this is something I've said a long time about the way the Ineos approach things, and it's really a factor when you look at the executives, like we're talking about as well. The word I always said is like nobody would be there by default. Just because you're there doesn't mean you're staying. They're not going to stick with someone just because they're there. They weren't going to stick with Richard Arnold just because he was a CEO and he's going to get a chance at it, or Murtaugh just because he was in that role and he's going to get a chance at it. They don't see things that way. And that goes all the way down to the players. You're not there just because you're there. We want you to be all in or not. And so the message essentially that they've given players is, we're happy to have you if you are 100% in on being here. And that's really, you're in control of that aspect of your destiny. Now there's players they're going to want rid of, but as a general message to the overall squad, that is the case. No more contract renewals just because they're running out of years. Oh, your contract's running down, so we're just going to renew you. No, do we really want you here for 5 years? Are you a focal point of the team? So it's a different message, and the players are aware of it. And so I think in some instances it does them a service, right? Because it's saying, we're going to open the shop up. So if you come to us and tell us you want to leave, we might actually have a buyer for you. How many players have wanted to leave and they've gone to United, and United have been like, well, can't find a buyer, don't have a value, so you stick around. Then like Pogba, like Martial in the past, and different players where they end up sticking around forever. Their career goes in the drain. They're unhappy and it falls apart. Well, that's not what's going to happen anymore. That's something they're absolutely determined to change, because as much as it is getting the right new players in, not being stuck with players who are not a part of the thing moving forward as much as they should be has been a huge problem, and it leads to all the bloat financially.
The thing that confuses me, James, we've seen like reported figures, for example, of 100 million. That's our spend, right? And people take that or leave it. Could be false, could be. I have no idea. This is just what's being reported. Now, obviously, depending on Europa League and other kind of substantial factors, that's not a lot to work with when you consider the targets and the players that we've been linked with. Is it possible Sir Jim can kind of inject cash at any point? Because I'm not, loopholes with FFP and all that kind of stuff. I'm not into that whatsoever. But how much of an effect can he actually have, or would it just purely depend on who we sell, what wages we get off the bill, and how much we box clever in a sense in the summer?
Yeah, well, let me try to clarify like the point a little bit without getting too technical on it. Because Sir Jim's already invested 200 million in equity, right, into the business. He's put 200 million in, aside to the actual United, right? The rest went to the Glazers, but he's put 200 million into United. And there's a maximum allowable losses that if you're not investing any money is about 15 million over a 3-year period. If you have invested money, that can go all the way up by another 90, something like that, right? It goes to 105 million in losses, essentially, is what it is. There's two different things, right? The FFP is you can't spend over 70 or 80% on player wages and transfers. And then there's PSR, which is you can't lose too much money. FFP is not a problem. United are quite well below the cap in terms of the percentages. The problem is PSR. They had significant losses in 21-22 and pretty significant losses in 22-23. It's a 3-year average, or 3-year rolling. I think it's a total, actually. Over a 3-year period, you cannot have lost X. money, right? And essentially the problem is that two things. One, you see them being a little bit tight with money this year, right? Well, 2021 was also pretty bad, right? The COVID year as well was really bad financially, even though there's some that you can write off. They need 23, 24 to be a good financial year to balance out some of the losses of the last 2 years, because the last 2 years they don't have any COVID write-offs, if I'm not mistaken. Like, there's no adjustments being made for lost COVID income because fans were back, right? For the last 2 seasons now they've been back. You've had a full array. There's been very limited. There's a really small amount, I think, of adjustments due to some extra testing things that went on for a while, but very, very minimal. And so they need this year to be good. So they don't want to spend much money before July 1st, first of all, because they want this year to be as good as possible to try to balance out the 2 years of losses that they've had.
Are the reports suggesting that? Like the quarterly reports, are they kind of suggesting that it's going that way?
It looks decent. It looks decent. Like, it's definitely better than the prior 2 years, right? So we got some Champions League revenue, even though we got knocked out of the groups, right?
Still painful.
But yeah.
Another knocked us out. Should we correct that? Onana put us out. Yeah.
Yeah. We have at least another FA Cup deep run, right? A few extra games that we get out of that. Basically, how would I put this? So they want this year to be better to balance it. They have these departures, but they're kind of at the limit. I guess I would look at it like they expect to be kind of at the limit. And they need this year to be good. Then they can... Next year, what will happen, basically, is that the year 21-22 will fall off the books, which is the worst year by far. And so as soon as that happens, you're way down, because if 23-24 is good and 22-23 is not so bad, it's not so bad, then you have tons of space next year. And so you look at it and say, well, sure, by next summer we could spend enormous amounts of money in comparison, right? Back 200-400 million seriously could, while staying within the limit. Not that they will, but they could. So they're trying to be responsible now because, one, they don't want to get into penalty area, and two, this summer is maybe not as good a time to do all your big spending. Like, if you're going to go all out, it's probably not this summer. It's probably next, because you haven't had the time and the preparation for this year the way you would have wanted to, right? This year is more like clear out what we can, start getting some good young players in on affordable deals to build up a bit of a base, and then look at it and say, next summer we'll have a whole structure in for a long time. We'll be able to prepare properly, because transfers are expensive mistakes. It's a lot of money, and it's a 5-year contract, and you don't want to come in your first summer make the same mistakes in the past, even with the best of intentions this time, just by nature of not being so prepared. And that's why I think you see a focus on English players, not necessarily English, but Premier League talents, because you kind of know what you're getting with Premier League players, right? Yeah. You don't get the transition between, like we've had with Sancho coming in and struggling, and that we've had with other leagues and, from the Eredivisie and elsewhere, where the transition is obviously less risky from one Premier League team to another than it is from one league to another. It just is, for so many reasons. And so I think that's a part of why you're seeing that, as well as young players, is risk limitation. But yeah, I think 100 million is the space that we would have based on some pretty big free agent departures, right? Big wages, Martial, Varane, and then beyond that, sales will allow us to buy more, but it's all about those losses. They don't want to have losses. I do think maybe after July 1st, things might loosen up just a little bit, because it'll be into the next year. They have a lot more time to make up the money. You know what I mean? Like, if they spend a bit, they have all next year to add some more sponsorships to bring in some more revenue streams and boost the income. But certainly not being in Champions League isn't the best for that either.
As long as it's not Veghorst on August 31st, then I think for United fans, they'll be a little bit happier because that's
and it's the Euros, and you know, I wouldn't expect too much to happen quickly. You know, like in June, a whole flurry of things just because we have new owners. Because there's still a lot of reasons for that not to happen, just logically as well as the Euros. Players are away and doing stuff, and you know, so I think it'll still be much busier in July and early August, ideally, than it would be in June from a transfer perspective.
There you go. I just wanted to touch on Ten Hag because obviously the papers need their clicks and TalkSport needs their options to talk about Ten Hag every other week. So I just wanted to ask you, he's come under increasing pressure from a lot of media outlets, and a lot of people are saying it's almost untenable. Like, to me, I don't really get it, but I understand like media have to sort of create a narrative. Reports are saying, however, that Ineos are prepared to stick with him for reasons of there's not many alternatives out there that they would like, and there's also they realised that the structure above him wasn't the greatest. What are your thoughts on it, James? Like, have you heard anything? Do you know anything? Or do you think he sticks in this role? Or do you think in the summertime, regardless of the FA Cup, he's a goner?
What's that smile?
He knows something, and he's not telling us. That's not that smile is.
I've tried to avoid talking about it too much, simply because just out of basic kind of respect for it too.
Sure.
I don't like getting into that. You know, I don't like through the season getting into so much about like about the manager. I've never wanted to use the platform that I have to, you know, call for manager out and things like that. I tried to avoid a lot of that, and you know, simply because my view on it is that there's so many reasons that players and managers have failed that it doesn't really make sense to be, you know, publicly using influence and a platform to scream for their heads. That isn't to say that there's a lot of positive arguments in the manager's favor at the moment. You know, I can excuse a lot of the negative things from him. And like when you look at those types of articles or that type of thing, that's kind of what they're saying, right? Is that we could kind of excuse some of the negatives here, right? Like we could say, look, he's a bad structure. He's been let down by that. There's injuries. There's a lot of factors in place that probably aren't totally his fault, right? But the question is this. Even if you take that all away, is he the best person for them from their view moving forward? And I think that that's the more relevant question. And I think that at the moment when you're seeing reports that are only kind of, when they say he's, you know, because this isn't his fault and this isn't his fault, that's all fine. They haven't yet really pushed an argument of why he is the guy to move ahead, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really more of the question. And I think it's very accurate to say people within the club don't know if he will or won't be the manager next season as of right now. I think it's totally accurate to say that. I know when you listen to the guys at The Athletic on the podcast, they say the same thing. Yeah. You know, Andy Mitten today said the same thing. We don't know whether he's going to be the manager next year or not. You're always planning with the manager way ahead of summer, right? That's one of the things. You just are. You have to be, right? You know, if they were like, oh, by the way, we're not going to talk to you about preseason. We're not going to talk to you about players. We're not going to talk to you about summer. You've sacked him. It's over, right? You've already sacked him if you're saying that.
What about our flight to America? And they're like, Eric, don't worry about that, mate.
Yeah. Don't worry about the hotel, buddy. Yeah. Not an issue. Training ground?
You sure?
Not a problem.
Do we need shorts? Do we need pants?
Do I need my passport? Well,
don't worry about it.
You might be going to a different beach, you know. Yeah. No, so it's obvious that they're going to continue to work with him. He's the person there on the ground. They don't have a replacement for him. They haven't agreed a deal with any replacement manager. They haven't done that. They're not sitting there, with a contract in hand for somebody else. I have my own. I mean, I obviously have different sources of information, but I have my own sources of information from the Ineos side of things that I think people know how accurate it's been over the last year. And I think they do know what they want to do, but I think there's probably a little more to it. Yeah, there's a way to go about it, but there's also let me just give you just a general example. I'm not saying I talked about this with Phil on the podcast, but just to give a general example. Let's say you decide that Marcus Rashford isn't the player you want anymore. You decide he's not our guy moving forward. He's not who we're building a team around. Okay. Does that mean he's gone that summer 100%? Probably not. There's a lot of outcomes that could still happen. Now, would you maybe be looking at replacements? Would you be looking at what fee it's going to take, what fee you can get for him? Would you be looking at costs for other players? Absolutely. And maybe your ideal is you sell Rashford and you replace him with Mbappe, but can you get Mbappe? I'm just, to use an extreme example of it, right? But then you want to look at it and say, if we sell Rashford, are we going to get somebody better for sure, or just somebody because we have to now replace this person who we've sold? That could be, congruent to the manager situation too. You look at it and say, because it isn't necessarily always a matter of he's the guy or he isn't. You have to look at it and say, what's the alternative? These are planners. When the Glazers sacked Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, they had no plan.
You could
tell.
They
had no backup.
You could tell.
They went in it. Yeah, they did when they sacked Luis van Gaal, right?
Yeah.
They had Jose Mourinho lined up.
Sure.
They didn't have a plan for Sir Alex leaving either. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a plan when they sacked Ole. They just did it because it was like, we got to sack him now. And there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stuff. And that's what clubs often do with sacking managers. They just do it. And then you're like, what's the guarantee it gets better, right? That's not how they think, right? So they're going to look at it and say, even if we had 100% decided Ten Hag is not our guy for the future, what does that actually mean in a real world? Because if you sack him and you hire somebody who you don't actually think is better, then why'd you sack him? That's pointless. So I think there's a lot of thought processes that go into this, and there's probably more I could say, but for now I just have to not. Yeah. About the whole thing. But I would say that, I do think from an outside perspective, it's telling, at least in some regard, that they haven't come out and said he's the manager for next year. James Ducker did his report on Wilcox coming in and putting him on trial, essentially, right? Which I believe is pretty accurate. And what it lays the groundwork for is that it's going to be made by football-related decisions, right? Wilcox is going to come in and look at it from a football perspective and say he's the right guy or he's not, right? He's going to look at it and say there's communication issues and all of that. So even with the injuries, even with the problems that I've had, even with all these things that should have been done, he's still, he's still not good enough at certain aspects. Or he's going to say it's the reason it's been bad is because of the injuries, because of this, because of that, and that's that. And so he should stay because that's not his fault, really. And that's what it'll be. Now, I will say that in my personal opinion, if Ten Hag departs, it will be more down to the simplicity of him being not Ineos' guy. They didn't hire him, and more down to, not being the ideal relationship for them with a manager and a coach, then it would be down to, because he lost this game or that game or didn't get great results. I think that's more fair, frankly. I think it's more logical than saying it's because of the results for the last few months. That's why we would let him go. I think that's more logical, and I think that's more in line with the way that they think.
It's whether he fits into their sort of philosophy as going forward as a whole, rather than those string of performances were awful, so you on your ass.
Yeah,
basically.
Same with everybody else. It's congruent to all these executive departures. Patrick Stewart, I think, is a helped them get the deal done. I think they like him, but he's not their guy.
Yeah.
And he doesn't fit exactly what they want out of the role. He doesn't have the expertise that Jean-Claude Blanc has. So they changed. I'm not saying it's just an example. It's got to fit within what they want. They own and run this club top to bottom now.
I wanted to touch on the data side of things, but actually you just give me kind of food for thought and a couple of things you just said, so I want to pick you up on that. But with Ten Hag going in, like, let's say the season finishes, we win or lose the FA Cup, whatever it is that happens, would he not also be telling that, you have to work with this guy on transfer targets? You're not going to go and buy 3 or 4 players that Eric Ten Hag wants working with him and then sack him and then get a new manager in, because then the players who've just signed are going to be like, why the fuck have I just signed when you're going to bring a new guy in? And also, on that as well, it's going to be expensive to get rid of him, right, and bring in a new manager in that sense, 10, 15 million. I'm not sure what the actual figures are, but that's why it's a bit more of a headache and not as straightforward, I would believe.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, there's a logistical factor that it's cheaper to sack Ten Hag after July 1st because his contract's going down.
Well, there you go. There it is, everyone.
July 1st. Ten Hag
birthday's
sacked.
on July the 2nd as well.
There you go. Ten Hag sacked. Exclusive.
There's. I'm just saying there's a lot of factors, obviously, and a lot of things to think about too, right?
Are you free on July the 1st by any chance, James?
July the 2nd.
Sure
July the 2nd. That's when we need him. Just as it takes over.
No, it's just an example, but what you said is correct. One of the things, though, either way, that Ineos have made clear to the players that are currently at the club is they're not there for Ten Hag. They're there for the club, and they're there for what they're bringing to the table, and that they're going to bring the club back up to where it should be. And that's not a slight at Ten Hag. Whether he's manager or someone else's, it's the same message. It's you're there for the club. This is where we're going as a team, as a unit, as a club. I think it's better. I think it would avoid a lot of conflicts, that type of message, because you're not there, when you see some of the things that have occurred, because there have been things that have occurred, I'm not talking about fault, but I'm sure we'll discuss it, with Sancho, with other individuals over the course of the last season or two. A lot of it is avoidable based on the structure of how things are running, because you shouldn't be there or not there based on the manager, right? You shouldn't be your future. If someone feels like their future is in the hands of the manager, like entirely, it opens the door to a lot more problems, because you get personal opinions into it, you get things like that. If that's someone's perception of things, right, then it opens the door to a lot more problems versus having somebody with real leadership from on high saying, this is the plan, this is what we're doing, we're sticking with it. You're either in the plan or out of the plan. Your future isn't live or die by if the manager likes you personally or not, or anything like that, or even if you just perceive it to be that way. So it's the same with recruitment, though. They're not going to go out and say, Ten Hag wants to sign you. It's going to be different. They're going to say, look, this is the way we're going to play moving forward. This is the style we're going to be in. This is how you fit within this team. This is where we see a need for you and a role for you, and this is what we have on offer. And then they're building their lists based on that, and we'll coordinate it with all the people involved. And so it shouldn't be an issue, because really recruitment done right should be not. It's not that you don't consult a manager, but it should to some degree be irrespective of the manager. There should be a common thread, something that continues no matter what. Like Sir Jim Ratcliffe has made clear in a few interviews that he's done, you don't want this pendulum swing of manager to manager that the team changes, like we've talked about it before. Jose to Oli to Ten Hag, totally different. So of course, what do you end up with? Nothing. You're resetting from the ground up every single time. And I think that's why people get nervous about changing the manager, because they think that's what would happen, is you starting over every time you change a manager. Maybe, maybe not. If Ten Hag stays another year and is replaced next year, it probably makes little difference to what the squad will look like. Virtually none to what the squad will look like, whether he's here or not next year. And so that's okay. And I think it would give you maybe less focus on the manager at United at this point in time, which I think would be needed and I think would be helpful for the manager too, where it's not always about the manager what happens, because it gets ridiculous. And there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, I wanted to pick you up. You did touch on the yellow elephant in the room, Sancho, so I did want to ask you about him. But just on that point you just mentioned, I hate comparing this because I hate Liverpool with everything that in my fibre and my being, but they have that structure in place, don't they? Like, Klopp is the manager of the team. He coaches his team, his tactics, blah, blah, blah. That's what he does. But every signing comes from that recruitment board that they have. Like, there's the famous thing that Salah, he didn't even want Salah at the time, did he? And he got him.
Bryant, yeah.
Exactly. So, and I think you're right. I think that's the way we need to head, and that's the model we need to be looking at. So I'm glad to hear that that's the direction they're going. But yeah, on Sancho, he put in, I wouldn't say a starring performance, but it was decent yesterday for Dortmund. I thought he was good. He's still under contract for United, as we know. Is there a potential embarrassment for United that a fact that a player they've let go on loan could potentially walk back in the door in the summer with a Champions League winners medal? Like, is that a potential for embarrassment for the club? And then what happens to him, regardless of Ten Hag? Does he go back on that loan? Do we sell him, but does Ineos just get rid of him just because of the possible toxic presence that he has? Or did he only sell him if they get the correct price? Like, what happens with Sancho?
I think... to answer one of the questions, I mean, I think the time for
embarrassment
with United is no, but I think the time for embarrassment with United is long past. The club is at the point where I wouldn't call it rock bottom, but essentially you kind of can view it that way.
Feels
we've done everything.
It feels rock bottom.
Right. We've done as far as we can go. It's like it's pretty much there, and it's like we've been through every shame, every mistake, 80 million pound transfers that haven't worked on multiple occasions, players on loan performing, people accused of this or that, playing in the squad or out of the squad, and the one out of the squad performing better than the one in the squad. There's enough embarrassments to go around, right? That I think they look at it without any personal attachment to the situation, right? The advantage that we have on this situation is there's nobody left outside of Ten Hag, right, who's been involved in the things that have gone on. The situation with Jadon Sancho predates Ten Hag, difficulties, the broken promises, and some of the things that led to it. And that's why I take a little bit more of a balanced view on it. It's not to let him off the hook for things that have occurred earlier this season with Ten Hag and going on Twitter and all that, because I think it's, in general, I very strongly feel, as we've seen with some more recent things, that players just stay off social media as much as possible and do not, under any circumstances, be tweeting and liking and shit like that, right? It's just good advice in general, but they do. So again, it's not to let him off the hook for that in the slightest, but there's things that have happened since the day he signed that have led to a situation where it's more like the straw that broke the camel's back than it is, the situation entirely. I don't think he wants to come back anyway, and I think that's fine. I don't really bear any ill will on that respect. I think it's, if he feels it's best for his career to move on as the best opportunity, it makes sense. I mean, in some respect, he's kind of saved his career. He's been struggling in England, and now he's performing in a winning team in the Champions League semifinal. And interestingly, Dortmund secured themselves Champions League by winning that game too. Aside from knocking us out, they secured 5th Champions League for the Bundesliga, and now they're going to be in the Champions League again next season. So he could very well just look at it and say, there's no way anyone can convince me that my career isn't going to be better by staying here next season, right? And that's fair enough. That's probably the most likely outcome, that it's going to be hard to say there's any reason United could convince him to stay, even if they wanted to. The unknown factor in this is Jason Wilcox knows him, from back in the day. and has experience with him. And he was, there was again some the issues that Sancho had, I think, at the academy level at City were issues with Pep and sort of the tricky aspect of getting into the first team, not with the academy at the time. And so they may have a good relationship. Wilcox may look and say, no, this is my guy. I can get him performing at this level in England and provide that reassurance and change his mind. Maybe. I don't know. I think the most likely thing is he'll be sold, and that they'll look to replace just because it's an easier, cleaner outcome for all parties. At the same time, they will wait. I think, again, they'll be unattached and unemotional about it and look at it and say, for what we get for him, can we get better than what we might be able to get out of him if we can get him going in England? So I wouldn't say it's decided. I would lean one way, but I wouldn't say it's decided.
Would they let him go for less than he's probably worth just so they can make that decision, or will they only let him go if the price they deem is matched for him?
If he wants to go, I think he'll go. That's the thing, I think that's more of the factor in it. Okay. If they have discussions and he says, I want to go, similar to what I said earlier, they've said about everybody. I don't think they're going to sit there and do we want 150 million for Pogba, when he has to leave, which was just an impossible price. I think they'll say, if he wants to go, they'll make their best effort to get him out of there at a reasonable fee. That's what I would say. So that would be first. When he finishes that campaign, they will talk. New people in there, and then based on that conversation, I think if he decides he wants to stay, he'll stay. If he decides he wants to go one way or another, they'll get him sold. So it'll be more based on that.
I think whichever coach is at the club is going to have a huge say on that, and also the style of play, because I look at Sancho at Dortmund. Yeah. He needs runners, he needs combinations.
He needs that fullback coming by all the time.
At United, this kind of chaotic style at the minute. Again, I don't know if it's going to be the same next season. I fucking hope not. But if it is like that, I think Sancho will struggle with that kind of transitional game, just in my opinion.
And that is why it's a little bit of a question, because if United are moving towards, which I know the management intends to, a more possession-based style of play, it suits Sancho more than it suits the wingers we have now.
Yeah. Sancho and
that
Ahmad.
Is a question. Sancho and Ahmad, I think you're sitting there saying those guys might be, better fits for what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We did say at the start of the show, if you have any questions whatsoever for James, then we can dive into him. I actually saw one near the start that I've bookmarked that I wanted to ask, and it was from Lewis. And he says, what does James, US, and you guys, Manchester, think of possibility of United playing Prem games in the States? Now, just a very quick take from myself. I think the schedule, the way it's going next season, the new Champions League format, all the extra games, I think it would make it, in my opinion, very difficult to fly over, have a couple of games there, come back. I think it'd be very, very messy. But James, more than willing to give your take on it.
Yeah. It's a challenging one because, like the NFL here obviously has played games in London now recently over the last few years. It's been a huge success, I think, for everybody in some respect. Okay, I will say everybody except one. It's been a success in that I think people in the UK have liked it. The games are well attended. It's for sure raised interest in the sport in the UK. There's a big caveat with it. The team they sent out there for these games had a horrible home attendance. So they're giving up a home game. They're getting better attendance in London than they were, back in Jacksonville, right? That's the truth of it. And so it serves a purpose. And in this case, it's like, if your games are going to be half full at home, then maybe it makes sense going abroad from a business perspective for even the club itself or the team itself.
Yeah.
The travel is tricky, obviously, for sure, and all of that. NFL only played 17 games once a week with 1 week off over the span of this 4-month period. The travel is less a big deal, I think, in that regard. The other factor on it, I will say, is that in the U.S., flying from the East Coast to the West Coast ain't that much different than flying from the East Coast to the UK in terms of travel times. This is a huge country here, right? So they're used to long travels. When you're taking a 45-minute flight down to London, we don't get that. The teams here are traveling far, for a lot of games and things. So it makes a little more sense in that respect. Now, on the reverse side of it, I look at it and think there's a huge demand already, right, in the UK for the home games. I mean, people losing out on a game that they could attend, I'm not sure that that's right, especially in the Premier League. I understand why they want to do it. I understand it in some respects because, I mean, it's a really complicated topic. I can understand 100% why fans wouldn't want it. I'm not saying it would be a good thing.
Yeah.
I could totally get that, and I think totally right. At the same time, let's say Spain start doing it. America is probably the biggest untapped market with the most money for football in general. You look at some of the TV money that's been increasing is a big part due to the international deals with the U.S. broadcasters that are set to increase. And the push is coming from U.S. broadcasters. So when you look at the money, which has to be a factor in it, let's say the Spanish clubs start doing it, and then their revenues start going up. How do you maintain competition? If your spending, if your transfers, if your wages are all based on revenue, which is what it is, if other leagues are suddenly starting to push up in their revenues by opening up new streams, how does the Premier League stay competitive if they don't follow suit and find ways to improve revenue? It's a problem. I mean, the Premier League is essentially the number one league in the world because it has the most money. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's the truth. That's the kind of the ugly truth about it, right?
That was the argument with the salary cap as well, wasn't it? Bringing that in and kind of
right. Does it hurt them? And
it, yeah.
Right, exactly. But for this, let's take the salary cap. Let's say they put that in. Well, then how do you stay competitive? You got to raise the TV money because that's what the salary cap will be based on. How are you going to raise the TV money? Is there more people? Is there a bigger audience to capture in the UK for Premier League football? No. It's 100. It's probably tapped out at this point, right? I mean, you wouldn't look at it and say, oh, the UK is an untapped market for Premier League football. Impossible. There's no way. It's full. It's done. You've got everybody you're gonna get watching those games. You're not getting anybody else. It's not a growing audience aside from natural population growth. So you've got to, and this is just kind of the natural order of things that you have to expand to keep up. So that's the financial argument to it. If Spain start doing it, if other countries start doing it, and now Madrid is making $1.5 billion a year in revenue, how are you ever going to compete with them on the Champions League level? How are you ever going to compete with them when recruiting players from league to league? That's a problem. I understand the problem that comes with it, even though I think I don't necessarily support it as a fan perspective. I can understand the issue. It's a concern. It is a valid concern. The league cannot be financially left behind. And they can't control what other people are going to do. They can't stop Spain from doing it. They can't. So they can't stop the Champions League from doing it one day, right? And saying we're going to start moving games over there. Maybe that's a better way to do it because there's all these extra Champions League games, not for the schedule, but for the fans. Because then you're not reducing the number of games you can attend. Since the games are set to expand, is to take one of those group games and send them over there or something like that. But it's difficult. It's messy. Yeah.
Sam, did you have any Q&As you want to throw out there before we get off?
There was a couple of people touching on the midfield. The midfield's an important, so there was a couple of CDM's important position. Anyone on our radar, James? Project 50, any updates on midfield targets? There's a couple of people asking about midfield options. Heard anything? Any rumours? Any sort of deals, talks going on?
Yeah, well, in general on the transfer front, there's been a lot of basic work that's been done since the start of the year to check in on players and build out these kind of lists of 3-5 players for each position. They haven't yet pressed ahead really on any of them in terms of the moving it forward steps of all of that. But they are, as I gather right now, really starting to kind of accelerate on the decisions, the thing that comes before moving it forward. Now that Wilcox is in and all of that, he is making his assessments and really kind of getting a grasp of this recruitment thing. Because again, they don't want to waste money. They'd rather not rush into bad decisions, make the best ones possible. So I think soon we're probably a little behind, but not much. The window hasn't opened, so we still have plenty of time to move ahead on things. But Holman in Portugal, I think, is definitely a name I would keep an eye on from the midfield perspective. I really like Amadou Onana, but
same.
Very expensive, most likely. I keep an eye on Fofana as a midfielder for sure. It's in flux at the moment, and that I think in particular is one of those areas where it's probably due to change a little now with Wilcox in, because the style is going to change, right?
Sure.
And you're going to see a bit of adjustment in how things are being approached on that side of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Just for any members in the chat, and we did kind of give 5 memberships before as well, we do have a video how Man United could line up next season, and literally a couple of players that James just mentioned there were featured in that team. So if you want to go check that out for all the new members, then do. If you're not a member, then click the link in the description, and yeah, help support the community
Also,
if you like to.
We're 5 subscribers away from 4,900, so that's 105 away from 5k. So if you're in the chat, you're watching it later, please do subscribe. We'll get to 5k before the end of the season. That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you give us an hour of your time, James, which we're always very grateful whenever you can jump on. I suppose one last question I'll ask leaving. Can you give us 3 predictions for the summer that you think's definitely going to happen? Can be anything, transfers, whatever.
Yeah. I think we'll get 2 center backs coming in. I think we'll get 2 center backs coming in.
Interesting. Everybody's saying we're never getting 2 centre backs, so it's interesting to hear.
I think we'll get 2. Yeah, I think it's just a necessity. From the way they look at it, I don't think they feel they have a single one they could rely on right now. So I think we'll get 2, and I do think we'll end up with a winger. I know that there's a lot of talk of striker, but I think we will get a winger. And then I'll make one prediction that I'm not super happy about overall. Okay.
Here we go.
But because I do think that one of Sancho or Greenwood will end up staying at the club.
I agree.
I think in the end that will probably happen. It's sort of odd because I think both have really good chances to leave, but at the same time, I'm not sure both will. It's just that's a little bit less. I'm not as certain about that one, but I think it's more a possibility than thought, And a big part of that is money. If you would ask me of the 2, I think it's Sancho who would be more likely to stay, which is probably a good thing. Of the 2, from my less
drama, less fucking scrutiny. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Because I don't see that Dortmund have much money. And that's just... I don't think a lot of clubs have money this summer. And I think he could be convinced to stay with the people who are arriving and coming in. I think one of them will. I think there's a good chance that one of them will, and that it's really likely that Ahmad will not.
Nick's going to go cry now in the corner. He's very upset about that.
I could sit here for an hour.
I'd love to see him stay, but
Nick, Ahmad's leaving and De Jong ain't coming. You can just fuck the season off.
We'll wait and see what happens in the summer. Well,
but it's early. These are earlier than I would usually.
Yeah.
The closer we get, the easier it'll be to make those predictions. So.
Well, we shall pencil you in, James, for July 1st. Or July the 2nd on my birthday.
Sure.
See what happens there. When's your next video dropping?
Probably tomorrow. I'll probably do it.
Probably tomorrow. Okay, so for anyone from our communities in the chat, do go and check that out if you want your information and you want everything accurate, which you don't really get nowadays, especially online and Twitter and etc. So yeah, make sure you go check James out, Muppetiers on Twitter. Check his video out when it drops this week, and hopefully James we'll see you again at some point. Probably transfer window as it kicks off. I hope. Anything else you want to kind of put out there before we head off?
No, that's it. Thanks again for having me on, guys. I'm happy to do it again anytime soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And yeah, Sam.
Check out, we're doing preview tomorrow, the Crystal Palace preview, aren't we? So
yeah, that's going to be interesting.
I don't want to do it. I don't fucking feel like doing it, but this is the challenge at this point. So let's just get it out of the way and come enjoy the pain and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, man. Take it easy, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you guys in the next one. See you in a bit.
Peace.
Bye.
The